afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's always very hard to follow Gavin, so I'm going to be less controversial. How much time do I have?
Take what you want, 30 minutes, 20 minutes?
I'll try and take less and open it to Q&A. So just by way of background, the PR machine that is IBEC have a quote from the Irish Times in the last year said Danny McCoy is one of the 50 people that runs Ireland, and somebody said before that there's an eye missing from that, one of the 50 people who ruined Ireland. So depending on your perspective, you can get an idea of which of those is true. My background is in economics, so what I'm going to say is going to be, it's about as welcome as the kind of snap of a surgeon's glove, but I will try and make this as painless as possible in creating the story, which I believe of the Irish economy, the real economy, as economists like to call it, and real in that sense in terms of the stuff that's made, the volume of goods and services. I have a slightly different perspective about what happened in Ireland. I'm not denying an outcome that occurred in Ireland, but there's a different interpretation of what happened here over the last half decade. So for being slightly provocative, I don't fully believe this. You don't need to fully believe. You only need to be credible. Somebody has to believe you. You don't have to tell the truth. It just has to be credible. Is that there's a very different interpretation of what happened in Ireland over the last number of years, which is very different to the narrative that's out there and that we've been living with. So, just by way of introduction, having been a macroeconomist and an academic economist, I've gone through various universities, both here and internationally. I've been at the Central Bank on the run up to the EMU, at the SRI, forecasting the Irish economy. So I've been a classic insider, and looking at all of that kind of run through in the Irish economy. I then joined IBEC 10 years ago, and that's given me the privilege of actually beginning to meet business people and actually seeing inside of factories and so on, and then trying to combine those two skill sets, for want of a better word, to tell a story. And this is a story that I believe of the Irish economy very passionately, and one that I've been telling for about 8 years now in the international media, but my proudest day is definitely the 30th of September 2010, where I had an op-ed piece in the Financial Times basically saying that the Irish economy is already in recovery mode. And that was the very same day that the third stress test came out, and the chairman and chief executive of AIB lost their job, and the Anglo debt was revealed at 30 billion. So it looked like I had perfect timing of career-ending foresight on that kind of comment. But as it transpires, it's one of the things, I suppose, that I'm happiest to point back to. I have about 15 other articles, of course, that I don't want anyone to see. So you get lucky once, you ride your luck. So what is the story that I think is of the Irish economy? And I'll try and put it in somewhat sterile macro terms. But first of all, I believe the Irish economy has been a phenomenal success story on real foundations. All right, I use the word foundations because fundamentals is now a pejorative term to be used, but really strong fundamentals, foundations. And the way to look at that is it's in the production process, and you guys are that key ingredient of entrepreneurs that bring the other factors together, the factors of capital, be that physical machinery and equipment, or as a society, our infrastructure, and then the people piece, the human capital, which is both a volume of people but also their skill sets. And you bring that entrepreneurial talent, and all of these get rewarded. So the rewards out of the capital or the land or the natural assets, if you like, of which we've got very little in Ireland, that's a rent. We see the return to capital is the interest rate. We see the return to labour is the wage, and then what's left over, if you're lucky enough, is to you guys, which is the profit. And I caught the end of Gavin, the profit piece just seems to be a bit that people have a real issue with, but you've got to take the risk to get that return. And if a society talks itself into a situation where there's great assets and great returns to be there, and you don't take it up, then more fool you. So watching prime time just a couple of nights ago, and a very good comment, I thought, from Mick Wallace, was quite an insightful question about the profits on the sale of the assets. And I heard Gavin rightly saying is, this is real Monday morning quarterback stuff, like when it's obvious, then, you've already missed it. That the debate was, why were these things sold off so cheaply? I remember 2 years ago was who bought Irish assets, because I was on that very program on prime time. And 2 years prior to that, who in their right mind would buy Irish assets, right? So the journey has gone through those kind of three phases. And again, that's something that you guys are very sensitive to, about the risk you're taking as you're starting off today, because you've no idea as to what the 4-year window will be, whether you're in the negative profit or positive profit. But you have a lot of people making comment about it at the time of your arrival in 4 years' time, who won't be on the journey with you. So when you look at those kind of factors of production at a more macro level, we've been off the view that the Irish economy has a potential growth rate of 3 to 4% per annum volume growth for the next 20 years. Okay, so it's not a prediction. Right? I'm not saying that it will grow at 3 to 4% the next number of years. This is a benchmark. Think about it as a kid in school. If you think that kid is an 80%, that's the potential. Their actual results can be quite different. All right? They may overachieve in that, but they may underachieve. They might be doing 40, and if you believe them to be 80 and they're only doing 40, it's a conversation. If you believe them to be 40 and actually got a 60, it's fantastic. So the potential growth rate of this 3 to 4% is that idea of where you think the economy can go and what can sustain it. And it's a very crucial point, and in fact it's the most crucial point of the conversation we're having in Irish society today. What is the potential growth rate of the Irish economy? Because it matters enormously. So I'm saying 3 to 4% per annum for the next 20 years, and it's volume, all right? And in addition to the volume growth, you put in the price growth, just like in your business. If you're selling 5 tables, you also need to know what price you're selling them at. So you bring in the price piece, and at the moment the Irish economy happens to be growing in official estimations at around that 4%. My colleagues in IBEC, the economists, believe it's closer to 6%, and I believe them. But anyway, official Ireland government is saying they think the economy is actually going to around 4% at the moment, and with the price deflator that's out there, in money terms, the Irish economy currently is growing at around 6 to 7%. Okay? So 6 or 7% of what? Now the great thing about being an economist is that you generally talk baselessly. No basis at all. And you listen to economists as they talk without a base. So every morning you hear somebody saying it's 4%. 4% of what? Right? It's the real will of the risk. What is it that you're hearing when you hear somebody say it's 2 or 3%? Doesn't matter if the government falls in its spending by 2% if the consumers are rising by 1%. Okay, but you need to know which one is the bigger base. So economists tend to talk baselessly all the time. So what I need you to have in your head just for the moment is, what is the base on which these numbers I'm spouting is predicated on? And that will allow you to have an assessment of what I'm trying to get across. The way we measure an economy is by this sterile thing, a GDP type measure, okay? So it's a value-added activity. In the Irish case, it's 200 billion. Okay, it's a nice and even number, 200 billion just right now. That's not adding up all the turnovers of all the companies around. So if you add up all the turnovers of all the companies, the Apples and so on, you'll think the 200 billion couldn't possibly be true. It's a value-added activity because you're counting somebody's inputs, so you double count if you don't strip out to just leave the value-added piece. So it's 200 billion, all right? So that's the number I want you to have in your head. And if the economy, it grows this year in money terms, which everybody is saying, even the international assessors are saying, is going to grow somewhere around 4, and there's a bit of 2% inflation, 6% of 200 billion is a 12 billion cake growth. So cake is grown by 12 billion. The government has just come out with a spring statement in the last couple of weeks and said the window for stimulus in the economy is between 1.2 billion and 1.5 billion. All right, so take the higher number, 1.5 billion. Think about in any business, we're having a discussion about 1.5 out of 200. You're talking about something less than 1%. All right? They're being accused of buying the election. If they want to buy us, we're getting bigger money. This is nonsense of a scale of money. People lose track. We have conversations of baseless conversations all the time. Baseless conversations, because nobody knows what it's a percentage of. So why are we, what happens there with this potential growth rate piece that I was talking about? Well, the Fiscal Advisory Council, all good people and doing a really good job, are the equivalent of the Road Safety Authority, who equally do a good and important job. But just like the Road Safety Authority piece, people aren't on the road with the primary function of safe driving. They're on the road to get somewhere, between A and B. And if you drive very, very safely and very, very slowly, you will get there, and you will get there, hopefully, safely. But it will not be costless. Right? You'll have set off earlier, so you'll have missed something. You'll have missed Coronation Street, you'll have missed a school play, so this notion that we're getting ourselves talked into is we're never doing this again, and we're going to do things very slowly, and there can be, and no costs are involved in that. In other words, if we grow slowly, and people are having a hand wringing, oh my God, we're back, we're on a 4% again, we've lost the run of ourselves. There is a cost to growing below your potential. It is that people are left unemployed for longer, that opportunities don't get taken up, that you don't build anything, and then you're surprised when there's constraints in the economy. You don't build any houses, and then you get surprised when the rental market becomes explosive. So we get into this conversation here about saying we're never going to do that again, so we don't like this growth, heavy growth. 2 will do. 2% is fine. But 2% is to consign our society to much slower, and it also consigns people to have to migrate. So there is a cost from this kind of safe now approach. But we have a further constraint. The Fiscal Advisory Council are right, they're doing their job right, but we also, because we had a hangover and we made a commitment on a Monday morning, and it made sense on the Monday morning, we did a stability treaty referendum, and then we signed into law, the law of the land, that we will obey these rules. And so the Fiscal Advisory Council have said to the government, your 1.5 billion, which I'm saying is trivial, is reckless. You actually only have 700 million to play with. And there's already a commitment for 250 million of public pay in that space already. So in other words, there's going to be no capital investment, no net capital investment. So for the first time in our history, we are going to have this year the public capital stock in negative territory. We are spending a little bit over 3 billion in capital at the moment. But because when we went into this recession, we went in as superly rich people, and we remain superly rich people, and I'll explain to you why that is so. We had a huge capital stock going into this recession, which we never had in any other recession. Every other recession we went in kind of poor anyhow, so it wasn't so bad, right? As Groucho Marx says, I started off with nothing and I pretty much held on to it. So that was deeming the success. But this time we had a really big capital stock. All those tunnels we had, all those motorways, all of that infrastructure you saw in the universities and in the hospitals and so on, they're depreciating. Right? So if you kind of want to start a fight, I don't actually believe this, but Croke Park is a dump in modern stadia because it started 25 years ago and it couldn't possibly be modern and new in a sophisticated stadium, and yet we think that we're going to bid for the Rugby World Cup with modern stadia. Things depreciate. So we're the first time in our history likely to have a situation where we're not investing. There's no net investment. And yet our population is rising. Since this recession started, there's been 500,000 more babies born in Ireland. The net outward migration of the 20-something-year-olds is 150,000, thereby leaving behind a net population increase during the recession of 350,000 people. So an entire Cork. I'm not sure is that an appalling vista. But anyhow, I will leave it out there. I can never go to Cork again now if this has been filmed. But anyway. And we wonder why our A&Es and infrastructures are under pressure and childcare and so on. You build nothing, you increase in population, you allow a media to tell you everybody's leaving the country, and you're trying to inexplicably then explain why you got these pinch points. Ireland's very rich. Ireland's very rich is the average disposable income, and disposable income means after tax, not after you've spent. Some people think disposable income is after you spent everything and what's left. Disposable income is when you pay for your childcare and pay for your house and so on. The average income in an Irish household is €800 a week. €800 a week, which is in the mid-40s when you do by 52. And then somebody says, but we're the most unequal society in the world, so therefore I'll grant you the 800, and Father Sean Healy will attest to my number being right, but it's an extreme of very rich households and really, really poor households, and so maybe the average is 800, but it's... Now the average household will have 2 adults and 2 children, and you prorate it. If it's the average type of household with 2 adults, even if not working, and 2 children, that household in cash terms would be in the 550 zone anyhow. So it's not going to be too far away from that average of 800. You're not talking about extreme. Ireland is one of the most unequal societies in gross income terms, but in net income terms, when you take account of the transfer payments, we're less than the European average. Again, it's an inconvenient truth for Fintan O'Toole and people who like to say that this is not a republic and that type of patriotism. It's a situation where at €800 a week, put in context the conversations we've had about water charges as a proportion of the average household, the type of charges mentality. You could say, but the taxes are really high in this country. Taxes are not really high in this country. Taxes are really high on some people in this country. 38% of people who are working do not pay any income tax legitimately. 38% of income taxpayers in Ireland do not pay any income tax because they don't, when you take in the account of all of the reliefs and so on. Therefore, the base gets very smaller and the average tax goes up onto a few. And therefore, there's this notion that everybody is really heavily taxed because it tends to be a lot of the commentators themselves who are talking about it. And then get guilted in to believe that there's some mass problem in this society, and the first people that have to get the tax cuts when they come are the poorer, who are the first up. So the USC, which on average for incomes just above 17,000 was in the order of about 1%, the very first thing the government is going to do is release them from this burden. Because the narrative is a crock, and we managed to allow ourselves to crock. Let me say something else that might you can disagree with. There is no mortgage crisis in Ireland. Couldn't possibly be one. So I've taken the leap from my senses again. So some numbers. There are 2 million households in Ireland, 2 million housing units. 400,000 of those are in social housing. People may have aspirations to be owners, but they currently aren't in a tenure structure that they are the owner. So they're in a rental situation, but they may have aspirations. But there's 400,000 of those. There are 1.6 million private housing units, right? Household units. There may be a house, there may be a flat, whatever. This is the base for the property tax that we convulsed ourselves for a couple of years on. The number of mortgages in Ireland, 750,000 mortgages. I have 2 of those mortgages. They're on the same house because there was equity release. It's 2 numbers, slightly different. So in those 750,000 mortgages, 2 of them are mine, but only 1 property. So I would contend, but I'm allowing, there's going to be a lot of that in it because there's a lot of equity release. But let's forget about that. Let's just take the 750 as if it's a straight up number. That means that 34% of households actually have a thing called a mortgage. So then those who are in distress with these mortgages are 10% or 12%, 90 days or more in arrears. 10% of 34% is 3.4%. Some of those could be strategic, some of those might be in buy-to-let and all of that kind of good stuff. They're minority sport. It's just 5% of people in what are deemed distressed about the mortgage. That's what's out there. There's 95% though that aren't. But a massive balance payments surplus. And we kind of think surpluses are good things and deficits are bad things. And that's not true when it comes to the balance payments because there's a hint in the word. It's supposed to be balanced. And what a balance of payments is suggestive of when it's in surplus is that you're a mug. A 9-year-old kid would teach you that. Balance payment surplus means you export more than you import. And by kind of a rule of thumb, you kind of go, exports are good things and imports are bad things. Tell that to a 9-year-old. Here's the gig. You get up in the morning, you make something, you give it to a foreigner. You don't have it, and it's gone out the door. Or an import is you sit and somebody sends something over to you and you have it. All right? So the reason that you export is to actually, that's the volume piece. The reason you do is to get the price. And if you've got stuff that you can sell with a high price, you can get lots of imports. And so it's actually the terms of trade that actually matters, the price dynamic as opposed to the volume. The volume is kind of mug's game. But if you've got a balance where it seems like a good thing that your exports are exceeding your imports, that's all right for a short time, but what it is the equivalent of is the equivalent of that very stereotypical wealthy person who has the resources but doesn't turn on the heat or the light and withers away in the house eventually and dies rich. And that's what we're up to. Because a balance payment surplus means a society that's not consuming enough and a society that's not investing enough. And yet it has a business model that is winning in the world markets to be able to do this. And we can't translate this wealth that this brings into this society to actually pick up the assets that are all around us because we've got a narrative that says, do you know what, we're bust. And that couldn't possibly be worth 43 million. And then when it becomes 60, oh, damn it. But now there's a fiddle here, so I won't get involved. And now it's 80. And let's have 5 tribunals about this. It's your stupidity that's the tribunal should be at. Right? Because we have sat by a situation where Irish assets have been picked up because others believed our story. And we couldn't believe our own, even though it was obvious and being communicated, but people couldn't be trusted to tell the story because somehow a soft landing or a hard landing or whatever that we just don't, there's a credibility issue. But there's a huge price being paid because Irish people have been sitting on massive savings, getting no interest on these savings, sitting beside all these assets and can't unleash them. So the balance payments surplus is indeed of a business model that works. That's what my FT article back in 2010 was about. It was clear in the middle of 2009 the Irish economy started to recover. 2007, 2008, the Irish economy had to deal with the Celtic Tiger overhang. How that was done was on the supply side. People took costs out, people lost their jobs, companies became competitive. By the end of Q1 2009, which is the worst period of all of this crisis, when most people lost their jobs, and the unemployment rate went from 4.5 up to 12.5 in an 18-month period. It then continued on to 15 a little bit later. 2009, when the economy turns around. Those companies who made these changes on their supply side, when they went to the market, those who were exporting faced demand out there. The world was recovering, demand was out there, they slayed the market. 2010 was a record year for Irish exports, exceeded anything that went during the Celtic Tiger, and it has grown every year since. I said, we're never going to do this again. My view is, why not? You know, Woody Allen said it's better to be rich than poor if only for financial reasons. What bit of the Celtic Tiger did you not like? The full employment piece? The wealth to actually make decisions? You might have made bad decisions, but at least you had the wherewithal to make decisions. So what is this fetish about not wanting to go back to being wealthy? Yeah, we don't want to go back to speculative activity and just conspicuous consumption. We can put down investments that actually can generate returns. We did a lot of those. And we look at the capital stock in the businesses during this downturn, it's been transformative, and I've seen it. I've seen the businesses. We have transformed the economy in the last 8 years to the point where the growth rates I talked about are not just achievable, they'll probably be exceeded. So this economy is set to rock again, and we're going to see very large-scale migration back into the economy. And the big feature to end on this point for the government is to have a noble purpose. And the noble purpose has got to do with the All-Ireland. Okay, so this is not going to be a Republican comment.